For Winfred, gripped by the fear of death, her voice was the only lifeline that connected him to this world. He drank the liquid from the glass in one gulp, as Ayla had instructed. Soon everything would be fine. There was no doubt in his mind that not. Because Ayla said so. A moment later, Winfred felt something rise inside her and she vomited a large clot of blood. The anxiety that the recipe was wrong only lasted a moment. As Ayla wiped her mouth with a tissue, Winfred's breathing became noticeably easier. Winfred. Hiram, who had been so terrified he couldn't even breathe, finally relaxed, walked over to his son's bed, knelt down, and stood at his level. "Winnie, my son." "Ah, father." Hiram caressed his son's cheek, which instantly turned pale. There were so many things he wanted to say, but he didn't dare open his mouth. He could only let the tears fall. "Your Majesty, I'm going to take a look." The court doctor, who had been waiting for Hiram to calm down, spoke hesitantly. Although the Crown Prince's condition seemed to have improved superficially, it needed to be re-examined. "Oh, right." As Hiram quickly got up from the hospital bed, the doctor carefully examined Winfred's condition. "He seems a little weak, but he doesn't seem to have serious injuries. I think you will feel better soon after a few weeks of rest." The academy director and the palace staff took the Crown Prince's pulse several times with a suspicious expression, and then stepped back with a surprised expression. It was a situation that he could not believe even after seeing it with his own eyes. "Thank you very much, Ayla. I'm afraid to even imagine what it would have been like without you. I don't know how I can repay you this kindness." Hiram expressed his gratitude, as if he would even crown Ayla with the emperor's crown if she so desired. In fact, he was curious to know how he knew the antidote that not even the most renowned scholars knew about, but he did not want to bother the benefactor who saved his son's life by asking her something difficult to answer. "Thank you. I'm glad Winfred is safe." Ayla ran her palm over her face. It seemed like a decade had passed since Winfred's collapse, just hours later. "I thank you even more. I will never forget this favor and I will certainly return it to you. I owe you a great debt." Hiram squeezed Ayla's hand and thanked her again. It was late, so he offered her a room in the palace. Everyone was leaving so the patient could rest, but Ayla opened her mouth cautiously, as if she still had something to say. Can I talk to Winfred alone for a moment?" "Well, if that's what you want, why not? Come on, Roderick." He was ready to give up the entire palace, but what was the point of stepping aside for a moment? Hiram even took care of Roderick, who wavered and trembled, leaving the children alone. Alone in the silent room, Winfred awkwardly scratched her cheek and expressed her gratitude. It was the second time he saved her life. "Ayla, thank you very much." But he couldn't finish the sentence because Ayla hugged him tightly. "Hey, Ayla? Thank you, Win. Thank you for not dying." There was a hint of moisture in her voice, and he could feel the shoulder where he buried his face getting wet. Winfred, taken aback, patted Ayla on the back. "Oh, don't cry, Ayla." Ayla, who was hugging Winfred tightly, wiped away her tears and looked into his eyes. "You know, Winfred? I think I like you. I can't imagine a world without you." Winfred hiccuped, surprised by her sudden confession. It was really incredible. He began to wonder if he had died of poisoning before and if he had already gone to heaven. "That? What did you say?" "I like you." Seeing Ayla expressing her love strongly once again, Winfred pinched her cheek cautiously. Judging by the pain he felt, it didn't seem like a dream or an illusion. As the reality of his words began to sink in, her face flushed. It wouldn't have been surprising if he had started laughing. Me too. I like you too. I liked you from the moment I saw you." Winfred stammered as she opened up. It was a dream situation. Of course, this was not the confession he had dreamed of. He wanted to confess in a romantic setting, like the handsome protagonist of a romantic novel. It was a situation he never imagined, being the first to confess it to Ayla. But what if he liked it? Well, Winfred. Don't get sick like today. Understood? I will never get sick. I will exercise every day and eat a variety of foods. At his order, Winfred nodded vigorously. Maybe it was because he had almost died, but he felt a little dizzy from the extreme movements, but he was so happy that he didn't care about such trifles. Winfred smiled happily and hugged Ayla tightly. He felt like he had conquered the world. A week later, Winfred, who had been resting peacefully to recover, rose from her sickbed. The day after taking the poison, he was shocked to learn from Hiram that Binka had poisoned him and that she was Byron's daughter. He blamed himself for his foolishness in trusting and following Binka, who approached him with bad intentions. To such a son, his father, Hiram, told this story: "It is not your fault to believe in the goodness of humanity, it is the fault of the evildoers." The ability to discern who can be trusted and who can't is something that develops naturally with age, so don't beat yourself up too much. And nobody is perfect. I hope you are as forgiving of your own mistakes as you are of others. As his father said, accepting and forgiving his mistakes generously was not as easy as he thought. But he decided to forgive himself, using this incident as a step towards further growth. "Your Highness, it is time to leave," Joseph cautiously called out to Winfred. In fact, she was worried that the Crown Prince, who had almost died just a week ago, was already leaving, but today was an important event that Winfred couldn't miss, so she helped him prepare to leave without saying a word. "Yes, let's go." Winfred put on her coat and got into the carriage. Because today was the day that Byron and the traitors involved in his betrayal would be sentenced. As the sentence and execution would take place simultaneously, the gallows was already lined up in the wide square, and people gathered around it to witness the execution of the most heinous traitors. And in the crowd, Ayla stood with a cold expression on her face, her thoughts indecipherable. Winfred approached cautiously. Ayla, who turned her head when she heard someone approaching, looked into his eyes and smiled slightly, expressing her joy. Winfred, who had walked over and sat next to Ayla, gently took her hand. In fact, he was worried whether Ayla would agree to witness that scene today. It wouldn't be a pretty sight, would it? Many people would die and everyone would applaud seeing such a brutal scene. Although he was greedy and only wanted to show her beautiful and happy things, Winfred didn't say anything. Because he knew how much Ayla had waited for this day, for it to come. The suffering she had endured because of Byron was not something Winfred could easily understand. He only hoped that today, at this moment, Byron would pay the price for his sins and his heart would lighten, even if just a little. And a little later, a line of carriages with prisoners began to enter the noisy crowd. Byron, his daughter Binka and the nobles who supported him with weapons, troops and funds. Among the haggard faces of those who had suffered greatly during the investigation, Ayla came across two familiar faces. It was Laura and her uncle Cloud, who he had been very close to for a long time. Cloud bowed his head to Ayla, his face pale, very pale. Laura, who supported her uncle, bit her lower lip angrily as their gazes met, but she did not raise her eyebrows as maliciously as before. She had been stunned all day, speechless, like a woman who had lost her soul after watching her mother die before her eyes, but she seemed to have regained some energy after Cloud woke up a few days ago. "I have to go, Ayla. I'll be right back. Have a good trip." Winfred released Ayla's hand, which she was holding tightly, and stepped up to the podium to pronounce sentence against the traitors. Sentences were handed down one by one, starting with those simply involved in minor crimes. Most cases involved confiscation of property and titles, exile abroad, or forced labor. And as more and more people began to commit serious crimes, more and more were sentenced to death and faced hanging. The Marquis Keynes was one of them. Cloud Eyre, Laura Eyre. Hearing their names, Cloud and Laura walked to the podium and knelt. These two individuals were the closest collaborators of the traitor Byron Lionel Vito Pellis, who usurped the throne, and were deeply guilty of complicity in his betrayal. However, they are deeply remorseful and have actively cooperated in uncovering his other crimes, so their sentences are reduced. Although she had already heard that her life was guaranteed, Laura, who was still tense and unable to breathe properly for fear of being sentenced to death, sighed at the mention of a reduced sentence. You will be exiled north to the Wirianchi region. At the Crown Prince's pronouncement, Laura and Cloud prostrated themselves on the ground in gratitude. They would be confined to their cramped chambers, unable to move, but at least their lives had been spared. After sentencing Cloud and Laura, Winfred turned the page to call the next criminal. Then, paralyzed for a moment, he looked at the writing on the paper. It was the name of the person who had hurt him so deeply. He sighed softly, calmed down, and cautiously opened his mouth. Binka. A short name of only 2 letters. If not for this situation, the surname Vito Pellis could have followed the name Binka.